So, hello everyone. I wanted to show you this video because what's about to happen is quite amusing. I'm going to play against a 1300 ELO player. So a relatively modest ELO compared to mine. There's almost a 1000 point difference. But I'm going to find myself up against an opponent who will play very, very well. He's opening. He knows his system very well, a kind of reversed Stonewall system. And there's going to be a turnaround, an incredible situation. All right, let's watch it. My opponent starts with the pawn to d4. I'm going to play knight f6 to control the e4 square. He plays e3. Now I'm going to play d5. For now, the center is the same. d4 against d5. But I'm going to test him a bit. I play c5. I'm trying to lure his pawn away from the center. He consolidates with c3. He's playing what's called the Collet system. Having this pyramid-like structural system and putting the bishop on d3. That locks in the c1 bishop. Players who develop the c1 bishop before playing e3, that's called the London system. But he's in the Collet system. I'm going to play knight to c6, trying to have the knight support the push to e5, but he just discouraged me from doing that by playing f4. Here, he's creating what's called a Stonewall structure, a wall of stone, with all these pawns here that will control the dark squares. It's a drawback to weaken the light squares, but it's very solid on the dark squares. So my bishop, how do I get it out? I could play bishop to g4, but he'll just play knight to f3. Why not? After all, all right, I'll play bishop to g4. And now e6. And maybe he'll castle kingside. There, that's what's happening. He's playing very quickly. Here, it's not interesting for me to take because he can easily recapture with the c-pawn or even the e-pawn and open up that file. If I push to c4 and retreat to c2, and after that, he'll play moves like knight to d2 and try to play e4. It's much harder for him to play e4 when there's this pressure on d4. But as soon as I play c4, he can retreat. I've lost the pressure on his center. And then he'll play knight to d2 and push e4. So I need to keep this tension, which is actually favorable because I'm not afraid of the exchange. Bishop takes, I recapture, and I'll be well positioned. So I maintain this favorable tension and I'll continue my development. But what bothers me a bit in these positions is that he's definitely going to play queen to e1, unpin his knight, and then try to get into the position. I'm going to play bishop to d6. We'll see what happens next. I also know some plans with knight to e7. And the knight and the bishop can play to the f5 square. You see, they play queen to e1. They're playing very quickly. This is a 1300 rated player who knows his system very well. I'm even going to play bishop to f5 right away. Actually, if bishop takes, I recapture. I end up with doubled pawns, but I open the file, and most importantly, I take away his most dangerous bishop. Because since his pawns are on dark squares, his dark squared bishop isn't active, but his light squared bishop was really dangerous. Now he plays knight to e5, and I'm just going to castle kingside. The idea is that my knight has the e4 square, whereas the e5 square I can contest with the f-pawn push. You see, that's the advantage of having both f-pawns. The f5 pawn will support the knight coming to e4, and the other pawn on f7 will come to contest the e5 square. And after that, place my rooks on the file. So he plays his queen to f2, so it's like he's waving a red flag. I play knight to e4 and immediately attack his queen. He plays queen to f3, now f6 to drive out his knight. From here, I'm gradually calming things down. So he plays knight to d2. I think I'll just play rook to e8. Place the rook on the file. If there's a capture, I don't want to recapture with a pawn, which would block the square, even if it attacks his queen. But that's just a short-term attack. The queen moves, and then I have nothing left. No, what's interesting is to recapture with the rook to always exploit the square and always keep the file attacking the e3 pawn. Even if he defends, he has to defend. He plays queen to h3, attacking the f5 pawn. I can play g6 to defend. Or queen to d7. Because maybe he wants to play g4 as well with queen to d7. He won't be able to, so I'm going to play queen to d7. If g4, I can take and my queen still defends. And on top of that, I free up the square Well, with the queen on d8, she wasn't occupying e8, but I free up the 8th rank so the other rook can join the attack. So rook to e8, still keeping the pressure on e3. He plays rook to f2. Here, I'm hesitating to take and open up the file anyway. I'm going to play g6 to solidify f5 and still give my queen some freedom of movement. He plays rook 1. If it weren't for his bishop, I could take with my bishop, because even after rook takes, pawn takes, I win his rook afterwards. But he still has his bishop. On the other hand, if I take on d4, he can't recapture with the pawn here anymore. So I'm going to take on d4. He can't recapture with this pawn because he'll lose a piece. And now, c5. The idea is if he takes, I recapture with the bishop to help attack. And if he doesn't take, I have the threat of capturing since he can't recapture. That's why he plays bishop. c3, by the way. If he takes, he'll recapture with the bishop. So that's not interesting to me. I play c4. I absolutely don't want to give his bishop any play again on this diagonal with the attack on f6. That wouldn't be smart. He plays d4. Now he's attacking f6. I can play king g7 to defend everything. I have this pressure on e3 because the queen was defending it, but now it no longer does. That's why he puts the rook on f3, planning to move along the 3rd rank to attack. He wants to reach h3 to attack the h7 pawn. Well, I'll have h5. Actually, I have h5 right away. I think I'm going to play it, actually, h5 right away. He plays rook to g3, threatening queen, takes h5 since the pawn can't recapture because of the pin. So certainly king to h6. So king to h7. I don't know which is better. Even king to f7. Actually, that's good. I'll play king to f7 instead, to stay protecting f6, you see. Now the threat is crazy. Takes on s4. He can't take with the queen because my rook is there, and if he takes with the pawn, he loses e3. I'm also threatening. Rook takes s4. If he recaptures with the pawn, it takes there. So he plays rook to h3 because he wants to free the g pawn to try to attack me. But now there's this capture on s4. I'll recapture with the bishop to attack. e3 here. So if he takes with the queen, he loses his queen. If he takes with the pawn, he loses his rook up there. Ah, no, because the queen is defending. I actually didn't see that. Oh, that's terrible. I didn't see that the queen was defending here. What a disaster. All right, let's play a4. So now I'm down a piece. Well, luckily it doesn't matter, for now we're not really playing. But I completely overlooked the fact that his queen was defending. Here, the a1 square. So now I'm attacking a2 and mainly trying to break into his position. So he plays queen here. I take the pawn on a2. I don't have much time left. He plays rook here. He wants to trade a bit, but that's okay. I could recapture with the pawn. I'm going to play pawn to a5 to try to play a4, a3. He takes here, I take back. I recapture with the pawn, not this one. I shouldn't free up the d-pawn and open up his bishop. All right, pawn to a4, he's going to try to play. Maybe g4. I want to play a3 to remove the protection from his bishop and then have two passed pawns. That is, two pawns that can promote to a queen because they're not blocked by his pawn. He plays f5, he's trying to open up the position. That's really, really tough for me. I'm going to play a3 anyway. If he takes with check, I'll take back. I'll take here so I can capture on b2 later if he takes on f5. After that, my king is very, very weak, but I hope my b2 pawn will give me something. I'm threatening to promote to a queen anyway. I'm attacking the d4 pawn. At least I've gotten my piece back here. Come on, pawn to c3. Let's try to make a new queen. He can capture with check, I'm well aware of that, but my pawn is closer to promotion than his. He's going to try to give checks from every direction so that I can't advance my pawn. He's going to do what's called a perpetual check. That is to say, my king's safety isn't guaranteed. He doesn't have good shelter. So as a result, I won't have time to bring the pawn to promotion, especially since my queen isn't able to come back and protect my king. So he's going to bombard me with checks from every direction, and it's going to end in a draw. He can't try to advance his own pawn because I'll queen much faster. All right, let's analyze this game. It's true that the computer only gives me 77% accuracy, but that's because I gave up a piece during the game. Let's take a look because it's very interesting both in the opening and in the middle game decisions. White plays d4. I play knight f6 to control the e4 square, which is standard. White plays e3, I reply d5, bd3, and then I play c5. I'm trying to create this favorable tension of the c5 pawn against the d4 pawn and to invite him to move his pawn away from the center. He'll reinforce with c3, but if he takes, there are players who don't really know how to recapture that pawn. You just need to push the e-pawn forward, for example. With e6, we attack, he plays b4 to defend. f5, the breakthrough move to force the b4 pawn away from supporting the c5 pawn. He can't play a3 because after the captures on b4, I win the rook. On the other hand, he can play c3. In that case, we take, then play b6, and we'll win back the pawn. We attack twice, and we could even attack in another way. And if the pawn takes on b6, then we play bishop takes b4 with check, and then we recover the pawn on b6 afterwards. So in this position, he played c3. I play knight to c6, and now he plays f4. He's playing what's called the stone wall system, the stone wall, which is usually seen in the Dutch defense with black. But here, he's actually using it with white, with a move in hand. He has this very solid pawn structure on the dark squares and the light squared bishop. It's only the bishop on c1 that's having trouble getting into the game. In fact, I played against that bishop, c1. So I play bishop to g4. I develop my bishop before playing e6 so that my bishop doesn't get trapped. Knight f3, e6, kingside castle. Bishop d6. And here you can see he knows his setup very, very well. He plays queen to a1, freeing up the knight on f3 so it can come to f5. And it also allows his queen to have routes to the king side to launch attacks against the castle. On top of that, the knight on f3 is really annoying because I can't capture with the knight due to the recaptures because of the pawn and the forks. If after knight f3 I recapture with the bishop, the f-pawn takes back, chases away the knight on f6 and opens the file. And that always leads to attacks on my castle position. That's why I play bishop to f5 again. It's the right move here. I oppose his light squared bishop, which is currently his most aggressive piece, along with the knight soon. And above all, I have a plan to counter the knight coming to e5. Because he takes on f5 and then enters on e5. But now my idea is that the pawn on f7, Q will go to f6 to chase away his knight. And the knight on f6 moves to the e4 square. So short castle, queen to f2, knight to e4, queen to f3, and f6. And that's the whole difference between a weak square and one that isn't. The e4 square is a weak square for him because he doesn't have a pawn to contest the presence of the knight. On the other hand, the e5 square is not a weak square since I have a pawn to contest that knight. He takes on c6, I recapture with the b pawn. It's not a problem to have doubled pawns because there are two pawns capable of destroying d4. Take on d4 and the other pawn will come to c5. He plays knight to d2. I play rook to e8 to be able to recapture a piece on the square when he exchanges. Knight takes e4, rook takes e4. He moves his queen to h3. He's attacking f5, so queen to d7. I could have played g6 directly as well. Bishop to d2, rook to e8. I'm directing my heavy pieces to put pressure on the e3 pawn. He plays rook to f2. Now I play g6, he plays rook to e1. I take on d4 because I see that he can't recapture with the pawn. Otherwise he loses the rook. So he takes on d4. And now I play c5. And look at the analysis bar. I have a very significant advantage in this position. By 2 points actually, even though I haven't won any material yet. That's simply because my rooks are attacking along the file. And they're attacking a backward pawn on e3, which the bishop, c3 is bad, so I have a better pawn structure and better piece pressure. They play bishop to c3, and here I make a mistake. I don't want to take on d4 because I think bishop recaptures, and the bishop will be well placed on the diagonal. I forgot that I could play rook takes bishop, pawn takes, bishop takes, and rook takes. He can't recapture because of the rook, and I win a piece. So in this position, I have to take on d4. And he has to move his bishop. And I win an important pawn, and maybe soon a second one, by the way. Well, I didn't see that. I played c4 because I especially didn't want the bishop to come back to life. I still have an advantage, but it's reduced compared to obviously taking on d4. He plays queen h4, he attacks f6. I decide to play king g7 to defend. He brings the rook to f3 to defend e3, and to later swing it over to h3. I play h5 here, and then he plays rook to g3. And with rook to g3, he's threatening queen takes h5. I realized that I could take on f4. Because the e-pawn couldn't recapture, for example, bishop takes f4, he can't take back because that would lose the rook. If bishop takes, I can still recapture with check. But I don't want to do it immediately because I'm afraid of queen takes h5. My g6 pawn is pinned and he would attack g6. So I'm going to move my king over and then take on f4. The computer says I should have taken on f4 anyway. But I prefer to move my king first and then take on f4 afterwards. And here what I didn't see is that he plays rook to h3. And I didn't realize that he was freeing up the queen to defend the rook. So I tell myself bishop takes f4 still works. I didn't see that in reality his rook was defended twice. So when I play bishop takes f4, it's an enormous mistake. Because I lose a piece for nothing. Then he takes and now I'm down a piece. So I'm completely losing. And on top of that, I have very little time left in the game. But I'm going to try to find some counterplay. I play queen to f4. I'm going to provoke a bit. The pawn on a2, trying to get onto the second rank. He comes back to f2 to defend. I take the pawn on a2. He plays rook to e3. I play a5. I want to play a4. A3 to try to break the bishop's defenses a bit. He takes on e4. I take back. I take back to get a passed pawn. He plays h3, a4. And then he plays f5. And this move, f5, really bothered me. I didn't take and I didn't push. Because if I push, I'm afraid of moves like queen to e2. And it's going to take with check here. It's going to get into my position. And the f5 pawn could help the queen to collaborate against my king. So I told myself, might as well let him take, at least. This pawn won't be able to help the queen work against my king. And I play a3, he plays king h2. And here I missed the right move, which would have been to play queen to b3 with a draw. I free up the advance of my pawn, and he can't take because I take the bishop, but lacking time in the position. I have 14 seconds, I think, so I'm going to take on f5 now, so he recaptures, and I take on b2. So I miss this idea of pushing my pawn through. He queens, takes on h5 with check, and here I played quickly. Same thing, I played king e7. I shouldn't have put myself on a dark square because he can play bishop before I need to go to light squares. Well, he didn't do it. He's afraid of my pawn queening, so he sacrifices queen takes d5 and now c3, and the position is a draw. They played a few more moves. He gave some checks, but he can't do anything else because the c3 pawn is like a knife to his throat. He's really scared. Of course, that I'll make a new queen. So he's going to go for what's called a perpetual check, bombarding me with checks. and that results in a draw. And in this game, he plays an opening that he knows very, very well. He brings his pieces into the attack, but when it comes to understanding the game, to strategic play, you can see that things aren't going well. He leaves me the d4 square. He has a bad bishop, and he allows me to put pressure on the e-file. But in dynamic and tactical play, he still keeps trying, constantly putting pressure on my king, and so on. And I crack in the calculation. I simply didn't see that when he moved his rook, he was freeing up the defense of his other rook. After that, I'm completely lost, and I have a position where I'm down a piece and have much less time. But you have to hang on, try to find counterplay, make things as difficult as possible for your opponent, be as stubborn as you can to try to save whatever can be saved. In this case, half a point. So it was quite an adventure. I was sweating buckets against a dangerous opponent. You can leave me likes, comments, share the video, and support the channel. We'll meet again soon for new adventures. Goodbye, everyone.